This is Suzanne Wagner of the C.G. Jung Institute of Los Angeles. In the next hour, you will view a conversation I held in July of 1976 with Dr. Liliane Frey-Rohn, a Jungian analyst of Zurich, Switzerland. Dr. Frey was a longtime student, colleague, and friend of C.G. Jung. She was part of a group of gifted colleagues who recognized Dr. Jung's genius early on and who provided him with substantial support and creative exchange during the years when he was formulating his major discoveries of the psyche. Dr. Frey studied philosophy and psychology at the University of Zurich, where she received her doctorate. Shortly after this, in 1933, she began an analysis with Jung, which continued on a regular basis over many years. In time, she became a Jungian analyst herself. She was an original member of the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich and served on the curatorium from its inception. In her teaching, writing, and analytic work, she has been a major influence on many individuals in the new field of analytical psychology. Dr. Frey published 2 major books on themes basic to an understanding of the new discoveries of Jung. The first, From Freud to Jung, was published in 1974. The second, Friedrich Nietzsche, A Psychological Approach to His Life and Work, was published in 1984. This conversation was filmed in Dr. Frey's office in Zurich. It was a great pleasure to meet with her and hear firsthand of her experiences with Jung over the years. She began by telling me how she first met him.
I got very interested in the scriptures of Jung, and I didn't know how one could meet him, this great man in Küsnacht.
How old were you then?
I have been 33 when I had just terminated my doctorate. And as one does after a doctorate, one feels very empty.
Yes.
One is so much in the intellect, involved in papers and so on. And so I had the feeling now, out of this emptiness, I need really the help of Jung to give me a new adaptation to life.
So it really wasn't just an idea because you liked him, it was a need.
You see,
you had a need.
Naturally one has always a need.
Yes.
But I wouldn't have asked him if this wouldn't have happened.
Yes. And so then you knew him since that time for?
Since that time I was in a continuous relationship with Jung. I mean, seeing him as a patient every Monday at 4 o'clock. And when he went to Bollingen, then naturally we had bigger vacation. And when I knew him better after a few years, and he invited me also to Bollingen, I have been twice there for a few days and have slept there in the house, and that was marvelous.
Yes, so you really became a close friend.
Yeah, you see, I can't use this pretentious word of friend. But we were cooperating, and I had often to go to the library for Jung and to look for ancient texts and so on. And then I was very much interested at that time in astrology, and Jung too. So he asked me to write a paper on astrology, which I did, but I never published it because Jung and we had divergences how to present it. Jung wanted it in a very positivistic way, and I wanted it in a more metaphysical way, and then finally I didn't publish. I was furious.
You were?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I was just going to ask you if you ever had any trouble or falling out or disagreement. So this was a real disagreement.
This was I mean, it was not that important for Jung, but I didn't want them to publish it because I couldn't adapt to this.
Science.
He wanted, to his viewpoint, he wanted me to work out correlations between the horoscope and dates of life. And I wanted to do it completely differently. So I had given a lecture in the club, that was all.
I see. Did you ever have any other serious disagreements with him, or did you ever get angry with each other?
And how much? I was not an easy person and never have been and will never be an easy. And I have a little head and I have my will power, and Jung had his also, and we had many disagreements, but we were, just because of these agreements, we became very close. Because I would say friendship in a way is only built on an attempt to be oneself. And Jung always said he didn't want people who just did lean on him. He wanted people who have their own viewpoints, who assert themselves. He wanted a public, and he didn't want just always to have just pupils around.
Or followers.
Yeah, followers, yeah.
Sometimes I wonder about that now that he's gone. I wonder if there's a danger that there will be followers instead of real people who encounter him. Do you worry about that at all?
I am not so much worried. We have not so many real followers because all these people who knew Jung are dying out. I mean, we are now a very small group in Zurich who knew Jung. And now it's absolutely important that now our pupils, or the third generation, I would say, that they build, that they continue the development of the ideas. And so it's no more so strictly, there are no more so much followers than trying to develop these ideas.
Yes. And you feel that that is happening?
It must happen,
yes.
Otherwise the life goes out of the whole movement.
Yes.
And this is now about to go, but I must say we have not many great pupils for now. I mean, it's the same thing in the whole world. We have not, in the moment, very, very great Jungians.
I see, yeah. I feel that way, too. I think that's part of what I meant.
Yeah.
I was interested in how you got started with your book on From Freud to Jung. Did Jung play a part in that?
No.
No.
No, this all I started after his death. Naturally, during these many years, these 26 years, I had a contact with Jung. We had discussed a great lot of problems. I had often taken protocols of what he had said, and I knew I was always interested in his thoughts about Freud. And but he didn't like so much to speak about his memories on Freud. He told me often, you know, Liliane, it's painful for me. If I have to go back to these experiences, I sleep badly afterwards. So that was especially considering his relationship with Freud.
Yes.
Naturally about objective ideas and thoughts, that was no problem. And there we discussed a great lot.
What moved you to write the book or to work on this problem?
Now I must think back, what was it?
Did you have any contact with Freudian analysis?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. I had known a bit the Adlerian school, but nobody from the Freudian school. No, it went so that since I had been studying philosophy and had always been interested in the causes, in the roots of things, history of philosophy and psychology had been always interesting for me. So I had the feeling I only will understand Jung very well if I understand Freud too. And so I started to devour the 17 books of Freud, and I took notes and notes during many years. And then I did the same devouring again the 17, or yeah, there are also about 17 books of Jung. And then first I had been writing a draft of Freud and then one on Jung, and then I united both in one volume.
Mm-hmm. So
and then it did me a great lot, because I learned a great lot myself about it, but still more about the values of Jung. But I also recognized the great values of Freud, because, I mean, more than before, I saw that all the basic concepts of Jung are based on Freudian ones, always going deeper, going down into realms of the unconscious which Freud hadn't touched, and then always also connected them with a symbolic viewpoint and the discovery of the archetypes. That was for all of us a revelation. And so I came to write the book. It was really for me. I didn't want to publish it.
It was a personal
it was
journey.
my personal need to get more clear, to understand Jung to the utmost as far as I could understand him. This was also one part which attracted me so much to Jung. It was that he had an opening to the transcendental. Yes. So you see that I never could have worked with a Freudian, because it would have been dried, it would have been killing for me. I needed the soul. And what was so marvelous in the work with Jung, it was his emotional involvement. Jung was always there. Jung was always emotionally interested.
Both in analysis and outside. Was
yes.
he the same? Did you experience him?
Jung was always the same.
Always the same.
Always the same. When you met him in the club, or when you met him privately or in the analysis, it was always a man interested in the, I would like to use the word, in the supernatural food. Always. Yeah. Into the depths. And you see, you could come into his room in analysis, and he was just speaking about the dreams you had had before, last night, not knowing them, but he was involved. He was so transparent for people. And that was a fascinating thing in the relationship with Jung. Therefore, everybody who knew Jung has a feeling he speaks one's own language. It was an inner knowledge he had for the human soul. But this was also naturally, we were so much spoiled when he was in his so-called anima, that is in his connected with his own depth. Then there was, one experienced it as if a light would fall into your head. One didn't see it, but one felt it, that a ray of his spirit was falling onto us. And one was terribly spoiled, because compared with this, other men were no more so interesting.
Yes, that must have been a problem. And
I will say, besides one's own husband.
Well, you were married. And
I was married. Yeah.
You had a deep relationship. And
yes.
How did your husband feel? Did he ever feel jealous of Jung?
Clear. All our husbands, the husbands of our women around, were very jealous. Yes. But since they knew, understand, that Jung was not falling into the traps and wishes of the women, so they had not to be really jealous, because Jung never misused his position and all these transferences. So therefore there was a limit to the jealousy. And in general, Jung also had not so much time for privacy, you see. I mean, generally one only was seeing him in analysis, and in vacation he was always inviting us separately to bowling. And especially when I was writing this paper, or helping him when he was writing about synchronicity. And I had to do and to prepare all these horoscopes for these marriages.
Oh, yes.
Then I had the opportunity to go very often to bowling, and we discussed many days about the project and later on about the results and so on. That was very interesting.
Did you know Emma Jung?
Oh, yes. And not only because she often was there in Boldingen also, but she was also in the curatorium later on. She was a member. So we were working together in this group.
Yes, she became really a professional woman toward the end of her life.
Yes. I think first she had given birth to 5 children. And then Jung told us, and she told us, and she felt the need also to know more. And then she studied physics and mathematics and many other things. And then she had an analysis with her own husband.
She did?
Yes.
How difficult.
Yes. She had also another analysis, but the main thing was analysis with Jung. And afterwards, he allowed her to analyze. And she was a very good analyst, and the opposite of her husband. He was more intuition and thinking, and Emma Jung was sensation, mainly sensation, absolutely down to the earth, and more to that, to the depths of the earth. And I think she was really the one who was saving Jung in 1944 when he had his great illness. She was day and night there. And with her background, with her depth, with her, I can only say, with the depth of her earth, she really was holding him.
That was the moment when he was so near to death, and he had the experience of being told he had to come back.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was not happy to come back. He had the feeling that he would have much more liked to remain there in Kos, where his dreams were leading him. But he then said, 30 women are waiting until I come down. Number 30. And then he came down. He was very weak during months and months.
Was Toni Wolff alive at that time?
Yes. This crisis was in 1944.
Yeah, she was still...
And Toni Wolff died, I think it was 1953. So,
did you know her as well?
I knew her. I had a few hours with her. It didn't work. No.
No, the chemistry was wrong.
It was wrong. The wavelengths didn't function. We didn't meet really inwardly. And she was very realistic and wanted naturally to draw our attention back from Jung and to withdraw this transference. And as long as Jung was living, we didn't want this. And so it was not only for me, the whole group, Cornelia Brunner, Aniela Jaffe, Mrs. Jacobi. Mrs. Jacobi could work a bit with her, but we couldn't work with her, really.
It was as if you each had your own strong relationship to Jung, and it was difficult.
And you see, you never can break a transference. That's just the opposite to the Freudian training. Freud always wanted to break a transference and to
resolve it.
To resolve it and to bring people to life again, down to the adaptation to life again. But Jung had another point of view, had the feeling as long as we have a strong transference, one must serve it, because he said there is a greater personality involved in transference. And we don't know what this greater personality has in storage, and so we must serve it. And that was tremendously difficult for Jung. He often told us, you see, I should have 10 lives in order really to follow the development of the integration process so deeply as he did with us all.
Yes.
But that was also what interested him. He many times said, without you women, I couldn't have developed my psychology. Without Toni Wolff, he couldn't have made it, because she had breaks in a way, and she was stopping him always when he had a temperament where he was losing himself completely, and without boundaries. And Toni Wolff stopped him and always brought him back to reality, and that was tremendously important for Jung. She also understood him.
Yes.
She had such a bright mind that she grasped it even before he understood it. And she was also really furthering his intuition very much, and because at that time he was also, I mean, he was a medical doctor. He had worked at the asylum of Burghölzli, and he was very intellectual until really he came to know her.
What were your impressions of Jung after Emma died?
Now, that was very difficult, a very difficult time. First, the day his wife died, he wrote me a letter, and I had given it to the exhibition, where a beautiful letter where he wrote me that he had lost his wife. And he expected me to come immediately and to pay him a visit, so I went there. He was naturally crying, very, very sad, and he told me, it's difficult to believe that a person who had so many richnesses, such a great brain, and that is all destroyed. And this destruction of the living personality, this was terrible for him. That was, and in those days after the death, he needed us all very much. He needed really, as it's general after a funeral, to be supported a bit by the surrounding. But after a few weeks and months, he began to withdraw. And he has not stopped withdrawing from that moment on. He still lived about 6 years more. But whereas up to that moment he had anima projections all over the world, he took the anima completely back. And he was really withdrawing inside to an extent which we had not known before. And he was sculpturing about the Grail, which then he had put into his garden. And he was very much then interested in Asian philosophy, also in the Zen. And it was no more the same. And he also became sick himself, a certain illness which then remained until the end of his life. And this also prevented him a bit from seeing too many people. So, and also from that moment on, he was really limiting his analytical meeting to the utmost. But since he was a very, very faithful person, not faithful personalistically, you see, he was not interested in you, in me, in this ordinary person. What he was interested in was always the self. What the self wanted, what the self had in storage, and he served this individuation process just up to the end. I saw him 1.5 months before his death. That was the last time. And then he told me that he had a dark dream that night, that he had a black spot on his head, and that he couldn't wipe it off. And we were a bit silent afterwards, and we both understood that it meant something deeper, this black spot.
Did you understand it as death?
I had dreams that before. I knew he was dying. And also there were outer symptoms, because in September 1960, these small attacks had started. And he had absences from 1-2 days. And he had really also very, very strong, revealing dreams. And since we were so lucky that we always knew his dreams, he spoke to everybody who was visiting him.
I see. He shared his dreams.
He shared always his viewpoints, and also when he was writing before, he read passages of his papers. So it was really a sharing, a giving in, a give and take.
Give and take with each other in a deep way.
Yeah. Yes. And always, nevertheless, remaining the authority for us, you see.
Yes.
In spite of all the closeness which he allowed us.
Yes. He mentions the dream or the vision of Emma Jung as if it were a portrait that she had painted for him.
Yeah, it was. Do you think of that dream when he saw her in that beautiful robe?
Yes, and I believe
which she had worn, very early after his marriage, and it was this medium who had sewed it, you know. The medium
medium.
Yes, the medium he had discussed in his dissertation.
Yes.
This was this woman who had sewed this robe for Emma Jung. And then he had this dream suddenly that he saw her in the dream. And he had the feeling this was now a real dream, meaning that it was herself still in reality, as a spirit, you can say. And I asked him, but how did you know this? Because he often dreamed of her, but then he had the feeling it was an inner figure. And then he said, you know, the color, the smelling is quite differently. The colors are much more vivid, so vivid, and the dreams were accompanied by a smell, a peculiar smell. And this is something which I myself also experienced later on.
You did?
Yeah. That one can, in a way, not with 100% sureness, but disentangle, I would say, metaphysically real dreams and figures from figures of the unconscious.
From the subjective.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's an objective level which goes further. I mean, it's a transcendental realm then we touch. Not only the objective level that when I dream of you, then it would be you.
Yes, but the other realm, the
that which is behind.
Yes.
And this was really for me one of the most important experiences when Jung was touching the transcendental realm and the archetype per se and the organizing archetype in this paper on synchronicity. That was so important for understanding also the mystery of death.
You say that you have had your own experience of it. Is it in your later years that this has come to you?
Yes. After, naturally first I was moved by death, events of my parents and so on. But that was not so important. At that time I had the feeling that the ceiling was taken away, that now I had an opening to something above. But then Jung died, and that was one of my most tremendous experiences I had, because still during 9 months Jung appeared all the time in my dreams. And I had the feeling that it was himself, just with that feeling for the specialty of a metaphysical dream. And then I had the feeling that he was still a guide during 9 months, and that problems which had been left open in our analysis were solved in these 9 months. I came to experiences of my deaths which were really for me, unique. But all that after his death.
Yes.
Still more deep. And after 9 months, I had looked up when it was exactly 9 months. And I still have noted it. Then in a dream he came and told me, Liliane, now I will leave you. It will be longer time until I come back. And it was true. I think during 1 year more I didn't hear anything. And then when I again had dreams of him, it was when I was writing on the book From Freud to Jung, and now recently when I was writing my paper on death. So this is really one of the most striking experiences, that a diseased person can be a guide also after his, or diseased people, it's after his death, naturally. Yeah.
So his death was really a very difficult but creative,
very creative
moment for you.
And I would say in general very important, because as you have now felt already, I had a very strong father projection, and it was absolutely necessary that I made a move from projection to a second father, I mean to the transcendental. And this began then really to become manifest to me. And I had other experiences of death, naturally during the whole individuation process. I mean, there is a continuous experience of sacrificial acts, of death and rebirth. And the first times, you see that also in analysis you have, that when a patient and when we the first time experience really that need to give up what we had in our consciousness, one falls in such an abyss, in such a despair, and one has a feeling one never will come up again. But the whole integration process is a continuous experience of that, and it loses that kind of, I mean, dangerous aspect. But this naturally was for me also something very important connected with death experience, because I had the feeling when one sees such a meaningfulness in our development, it can't stop with death. And it will be in the new existence after death, because I am sure that death is at the same time accompanied by a new birth. That's just one and the same. And that the new existence will be not so beautiful and not so peaceful as one likes to think, but that the individuation process, the tension of the opposites, the difficult experiences will continue. One relief will be it's no more connected with the body. So the pain of the body and matter, this will disappear. But the tension remains between a fiery center and, I would say, and a field around. I mean, that's my viewpoint.
I see.
And the subtle body. The subtle body and the core of the center. So, I mean, the integration process really for me it has been very important for my viewpoint about death.
Yes.
And I have studied naturally to a great extent mythological documents. I wanted to know what have our ancestors known about it, and I studied mainly also the Book of the Dead of Egypt, and then the Tibetan book. We had a marvelous book now written by Professor Lauf. And so, I mean, I tried always to check my viewpoints with... And then I had another experience, but very early when I was 37 years old. That was a time when Jung was dealing with a Tibetan book on the dead. There, suddenly it was Christmas time, and suddenly in the morning at 4, I was awakened by a spook. It's a right word, spook, yeah, in the room. And I got astonished. I was putting on the light. When the light was shining, then it was quiet, but afterwards it continued. And then I had the feeling, now I want to take the Tibetan book. And I read the first page where the Guru says to the dying person, mind you, you are dead now. You must realize that you are dead, and you must not incarnate anymore. After this, it got quiet in my room, completely quiet. The spook was stopping. And the next day, I was going down, and my maid told me that the person had died. 2 hours afterwards. So it was clear that she had looked, she wanted to gain some support. She knew I was analyzing and so on.
How did the spook appear? How did the ghost?
Oh, noise in all the furniture, cracking of the wood and so on.
And the moment that you took in this statement that you are really dead now, and you must not incarnate again,
I had naturally first done a certain kind of active imagination in order to understand what it was like. And then in my vision I saw a bed, a person lying on a bed and a candle behind. And then I had the feeling, it's connected with death. And then I was reading.
When did you begin to write about death?
Oh, that was much later, after the death of my husband, which happened yesterday, 6 years ago.
Was that, what was the effect of that experience on you?
Of my husband?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a terrific experience. I was in despair during 3 years. But I knew, naturally, I was sucked up by the dead. I mean, I wanted to follow into the hereafter. But then I always told me, Liliane, you are an analyst. You must prove that one can overcome also a deep, deep grief. And I was working hard, and I knew that's now, and a year after the death of my husband, my brother, the only relative I still had, was dying, and so on. I was then completely alone. And I understood loneliness is now part of my myth. I have to accept it and to live with it. And gradually I got my footing again, but it lasted 3 years. And the last 3 years I got again my vitality back. But it was the tremendous experience of my life, much deeper than the experience of the death of Jung.
Yes.
That was a transference experience. But with my husband there was real love, real binding.
Yes. You're really now alone with yourself.
Yes.
Yes. With the self.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a whole thing, you can say it was a deep religious experience. From that moment on, I had no real, I would say, no friend who could accompany me anymore, and I turned completely to a relationship to God. Since that time, what helped me really out of it was my religious experience, was prayer, meditation, connection really. I must say God became my big friend, and still is. And this helps me nowadays to live. Yes. I'm no more alone. Yes. You see, but I had to go through this crisis of being completely alone and to discover that somewhere I'm not alone. Now, I naturally had many dreams concerning the death, about the existence of my husband, and what was actually fascinating me was always the question, is there an existence after death? will I meet my husband again? Is it more as, do we live more in form of a spiritual existence? Have we a subtle body or haven't we? And I mean, you know, I was interested also in philosophy, so these questions moved me mostly. And I had naturally some experiences that I had the feeling I saw my husband in the room. So I mean, all these experiences moved me, and I wanted to approach it scientifically, because my personal experiences were not enough for me. And I must say, really, that the work of Jung about synchronicity and the archetype, the organizing archetype per se, this gave me a bridge to also to all my studies about mythology. I had studied a great lot of dreams of other people about approaching death, and especially about experiences of dying persons who then came back to life again. And I was amazed that they all had experienced such a great beauty and a relief and the feeling of being saved, and to come back for them was tremendously difficult. So these documents, then the dreams before death, and all these mythological documents, this really was raising the question in me, now, what can we deduce from it? Have we to take this only symbolically? Or is a real reality behind? And in that moment, the studies of Jung synchronicity was revealing to me, because when he spoke about this story about the scarab, I don't know if you know it, in the synchronicity, Jung was in a consultation, and his patient brought him a dream, a woman patient, about a golden scarab. She had been in very great difficulties, and she told him this dream. And suddenly Jung said, "Ha! What happened?" A little animal like a scarab is not completely the same, but the sort which exists here came and was knocking at the window. And for Jung that was really extremely fascinating, and he had had still other experiences where something in the outer reality responded to an inner state of mind. And from there he deduced that there is no causal explanation between these two. It's impossible. How could we call for these animals? And so he came really to this very important statement that there is an acausal connection, that there is an archetype, a transcendental archetype, which arranges these coincidences, which at the same time arranges here the dream and there the outer event. And you see, this was important, because when there is an archetype who is really, I mean, in a certain kind of way, has this connection between physics and psychic events. So it's also possible that this archetype really organizes life and death. And from there, I really got my deepest insights about death. And there are still other very important things Jung described in his letters, when he said that he drew the conclusion from this hypothesis that we live always in two worlds. We live in the empirical world, and we live in a world, an eternal world, down, really, in the background, but we always live in these two worlds. And such synchronistic effects are due to the breaking in of the eternity into our empirical world. And from there, it's no more so difficult to understand that death is also a breaking in of the eternity into our life, and that at the same time, when there is this breaking in of the eternity in our life, that there is also the awakening of a new existence. And this was for me revealing, and since then I really am filled with happiness, because I really know inside that death is the new birth at the same time. So I'm not afraid of death at all. I think I go into a new existence, and it continues. Life, I must not say life, but existence continues. And this is what I felt about that.
Do you feel that it's important to be conscious at the moment of death?
No, I don't think. I think it's very important what we realize during our life, that we don't overlook that there is death in life, and that we don't simply blindly live. But I think we all who are concerned with integration process are concerned with dying and being reborn. But I would say it's necessary at a certain age to reflect upon death, and to reflect, what have I done in life? What was my myth, as Jung put it? That was a great question Jung had, what is my myth? And I came really also to discover a bit my myth, and I think I had to discover that it's not to become conscious or to bring consciousness to life as Jung's myth was. Jung emphasized many times that he said he was in the Chinese horoscope, he was a pig. And a pig is really always concerned with the earth, and he had really to dive into the earth and to bring consciousness out of the darkness. This is the myth of Jung. And naturally then we all had to ask ourselves, what is our myth? And I have the feeling my myth is to love. And I do work in this way. It's not a personal love which binds me with my patients, but I love quite deeply the self as far as I understand it. I am devoted to the self, and I love the possibilities, and I'm really fascinated to mold the possibilities and to bring them to something. And I think that's more feminine. For us, eros is the most important thing. And I would say just all the crises in my life, or the few crises where I had to realize that I was alone, were always a bridge to go deeper into the real love, and not to the extraverted connection, but to something really connected with the depths of my being.
Back to your own discovery of your own myth, I imagine that consciousness came to you at different moments along the way.
Yes, I was highly emotional in the beginning. I was more really an emotionally working person. But I had studied many years and taken the doctorate in philosophy, so I had become accustomed, I would say, to an intellectual work. But this is different than from the real consciousness, because to become conscious in the Jungian way, this means really to be connected with some part of one's own soul, and just not through the head, but through the transformation of your emotion, if you want, and transformation of your intellect. And it's clear that each time when one is undergoing a very difficult crisis, one comes out, if one survives, with a new consciousness. One gets less involved, one gets a bit more distance towards events and towards people. The head comes a bit out of the water. I didn't want, after my husband died, to live and to accept this complete loneliness. I was afraid of it until as I told you, I found really that I could turn really immediately and directly to God. That was something quite different. I always had been a bit religious, but in a very conservative way, and not my own experiences. And really to know that if you ask for something, or if you are really looking for the help of God, the help comes. And this was a deep experience. During my book on Freud, and when I wrote about Freud and Jung, that was now prior to the death of my husband, but nevertheless I already had started there to have a deeper religious experience. And Jung came really every night, practically every time when I stumbled over difficulty, and there were many difficulties, because the Jungian teaching has many contradictions, has many, I don't know the word, and to bring this, to understand this, to try to be correct and so on. Often I went to bed and I thought, no, that's now really finished. I can't continue. I don't understand this. I can't continue. And each time Jung came, or some other realization through my dreams came. So this is really the greatest help. Now I never can naturally say for sure that it's the objective Jung, but nevertheless, such a complex in the collective unconscious as Jung then was after his death. For me, the collective unconscious and the land of the death is just the same. I mean, I think that the dead people are, when they are strong and have lived their life, they become a complex of the collective unconscious. Jung I had discussed with him also about this problem, and he told me once, when I think, we spoke about reincarnation and all that. Then he said, when we can realize what our self wants us, when we gradually become our own individuality, and then all these superficial things are falling away, and these superficial things can become later on fragmented personalities in the hereafter. But that what we have brought out during our life, this, I would say, a certain kind of stable individuality, which is not ego consciousness. It's an archetypal knowledge, if you want to say. And this is probably that which is surviving. This is probably this surviving existence. It's a new kind of individuality, very much built on this image of the archetype.
Do you refer to that as the subtle body, or is there a difference?
Yes, the subtle body, it's both, it's subtlety and it's body. But the body is naturally not, as Christianity assumes, a body of flesh, but it's a subtle spiritual body. But it is feminine, I'm sure, according to all these experiences. As far as one can use the word sure, but I like to say it, that the pair of opposites between passivity and activity, you can even say masculinity in a certain way, and femininity, that remains. This tension remains. And probably our goal is to go still further and further until, as the Asian people say, we are dissolved in God, in a way, in the universal. spirit.
Well, so to your question of whether or not you will meet your husband,
Yeah.
What do you now feel?
I think that my husband was a very strong individuality. So I could assume that he still one can encounter him in the hereafter. And I also, according to my dreams, I have the feeling I shall meet him. But I mean, personalities who are too much built of fragments, I don't know if one really, if it's possible to meet them later on, if they have not to be reborn. I hate the idea of rebirth. Jung is much more positive with regard to reincarnation. But for me, this idea of being reborn in this life, in this world, that's hideous, simply. If I will be asked later on, I would prefer really not to be reborn.
But the individuation process itself, as Jung has described it, is taking place here and now if we relate to it.
The individuation process has really the goal to approach wholeness. I mean, to establish a balance, if possible, between the various functions, the types of attitude, and especially also, I mean, to work on the inferior parts. And I think this will continue. I don't think that such a marvelous thing than our spirit and the individuation process. This is not only meant for this world, but Jung stressed, as you know, very much the meaning of this three-dimensional life, because he said without this struggle with the opposites, we couldn't reach consciousness. And we need that, according to Jung, because his myth was really oriented in this direction. And I think we, for women, really, I would say, for us, it's important to realize, really, that to overcome the separateness from one individual and the other, to bridge it by love. And I think this probably is for us the goal here of the individuation process, and perhaps a universal love later on. But finally, men and women must realize both.